Before anyone searched her name, before police photos, before courtrooms and headlines, before one night came to define how she would be remembered, there was Britney. Britney Jane Gargle was 18 years old, living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. She was in that in-between stretch of life where you're no longer a kid, but adulthood hasn't fully settled in yet. She was finishing high school, working more than one job, and talking about the future in the loose, hopeful way young people do, like it was something still taking shape. Life hadn't been easy for her. Britney was raised mostly by her grandmother, Vicky Wickenhauser. There was instability early on, the kind that forces you to grow up faster than you should. Britney learned how to take care of herself, how to adapt, how to keep going, even when things felt uncertain. The people who knew her remember someone full of energy, sometimes restless, sometimes impulsive, but always engaged. Britney laughed loudly. She talked fast. She had a way of filling a room without trying to. She made plans even when she didn't have every detail figured out yet. She wanted independence. She wanted stability. She wanted more than what she'd started with. Britney talked about working in hospitality someday, maybe even owning hotels. They weren't detailed plans, but they mattered. They were proof that she saw her life as something still unfolding. She balanced responsibility with being young. She worked her shifts, she spent nights with friends, she navigated relationships, she made mistakes that didn't feel permanent at the time. Nothing about her life suggested it was about to stop. Nothing in her final weeks pointed to danger. To the people who loved her, Britney wasn't a case or a headline. She was a granddaughter, a friend, a teenager still trying to figure herself out. She trusted the people around her. She believed she was safe with those she knew. She walked into that final night thinking it was just another evening, one that would end with sleep and a tomorrow waiting on the other side. That's who Britney Gargle was. Not a victim first. Not a story yet. Just a young woman, standing on the edge of becoming, with a future she never got the chance to finish imagining. By the evening of March 23, 2015, Britney Gargle was doing what a lot of 18-year-olds do on a school night, spending time with friends, moving between places she knew well, not thinking much beyond the next few hours. Nothing about that night felt unusual. No one around her had any reason to believe it would be her last. Britney was with Cheyenne Rose Antoine, a close friend she had known for years. They had grown up together in Saskatoon, their lives crossing through school, shared challenges, and the kind of long history that builds quiet trust. To friends and family, their relationship seemed steady. There were no visible signs of conflict, nothing that raised concern. Late that night, just after midnight, Britney and Cheyenne were at Britney's grandmother's home, a place Britney saw as familiar and safe. While they were there, the two took a selfie together, smiling into the camera. It was casual, easy, the kind of photo that doesn't feel important when you take it. Later, it would become one of the most closely examined pieces of evidence in the case. After they left the house, Britney was never seen alive again. By the early morning hours of March 25th, when Britney hadn't come home and couldn't be reached, worries started to grow. Britney wasn't someone who disappeared without checking in. As the hours passed, calls went unanswered. Messages weren't returned. What first felt like a late night slowly turned into something much heavier. And then came the call no family is ever prepared for. Police told Britney's loved ones that a young woman had been found dead along a rural road southwest of Saskatoon, near Cedarville Estates, close to the landfill. At first, her identity wasn't confirmed, but as details were released, her tattoos, the clothes she was wearing, the truth became impossible to ignore. It was Britney. The place where her body was found raised immediate questions. She was far from home, in an isolated area with no clear reason for her to be there. Her shoes were missing. There were signs she had fought back. Investigators would later determine that she had been strangled, a violent, personal act that suggested she had been close to the person who killed her. For the people who knew Britney, the news was devastating. Nothing about her life had prepared them for this ending. Ryans described Britney as energetic and driven. She worked multiple jobs while finishing high school and talked openly about the future she wanted for herself. She had plans. She had momentum. She knew where she was trying to go. And now, all of it had ended on the side of a road. As word of her death spread through Saskatoon, the reaction followed a familiar pattern. shock, grief, and a deep need to understand how this could happen. Vigils began to appear, social media filled with photos, memories, and questions. Classmates struggled to make sense of how someone they had just seen, just talked to, could be gone. While the city mourned, detectives with the Saskatoon Police Service began working through Britney's final hours. They traced her movements, reviewed surveillance footage, and spoke with the people who had been with her that night. One name kept coming up: Cheyenne Antoine. At first, Cheyenne was seen as a grieving friend. She cooperated with police. She spoke publicly about Britney's disappearance. Online, she posted messages asking where Britney was and saying she hoped her friend had made it home safely. Nothing about her behavior immediately stood out. But as hours turned into days and days into weeks, small problems began to surface. Details that didn't quite match. Timelines that shifted, answers that felt incomplete. Gradually, investigators began to understand that Britney Gargle's final night wasn't as simple as it had first appeared. What happened between those last smiling photos and the stretch of rural road where Britney was found? And why did every attempt to get clear answers seem to lead back to the same person? Because the truth wasn't coming from a stranger. It was coming from someone Britney trusted. In the days after Britney's death, investigators focused on one goal above all others: piecing together her last movements. Where she had gone, who she had been with, and how she ended up alone, miles from anywhere she was supposed to be. From the very beginning, Cheyenne Antoine was central to that timeline. She had been with Britney during the last confirmed hours of her life. She had taken the final known photo of her, and she was the last person Britney was known to trust that night. When police first spoke with Cheyenne, she didn't come across as someone hiding something. She spoke as a friend in shock, emotional, upset, and willing to cooperate. She told investigators that she and Britney had been drinking that night, moving between a few places, before eventually going their separate ways. In Cheyenne's initial account, Britney left with a man she didn't know. But once detectives started checking those details, things didn't hold up. Surveillance footage from the places Cheyenne mentioned didn't show them there. Taxi records didn't line up with parts of her story. And when police followed up, Cheyenne's version of the night began to shift. Not in obvious ways, but in small ones. Details changed, timelines moved, certain moments were remembered differently each time she talked about them. Those kinds of inconsistencies matter, especially in a homicide investigation. As police continued speaking with people close to Cheyenne, another troubling detail came up. A relative told investigators that Cheyenne had returned home in the early morning hours, visibly distressed. More than just upset, more than grief. According to that account, Cheyenne made statements that suggested she had been involved in Britney's death. When investigators confronted her with this, Cheyenne denied it. She said she didn't know what had happened to Britney. She said she had blacked out from drinking, and if anything had taken place, she claimed she had no memory of it. Investigators didn't find that explanation convincing. Britney's injuries pointed to a close, physical struggle, not a random encounter. Strangulation takes time. It takes sustained pressure. It requires being close to someone. It doesn't happen by accident, and it's rarely done by a stranger. Even so, without direct evidence tying someone to the act itself, the investigation slowed. From the outside, it seemed like things had gone quiet. But behind the scenes, detectives kept working through Britney's final digital trail. Text messages, call logs, social media, looking for anything that might have been missed. That search led them back to something that hadn't stood out at first. The selfie, taken just after midnight. Two friends standing close together, smiling. When investigators enlarged the photo, their attention wasn't on the faces. It was on what Cheyenne was wearing. Around her waist was a belt. The same belt that had been found near Britney's body. At the scene, police had recovered a belt believed to have been used to strangle Britney. At the time, they didn't know who it belonged to. But when the photo was placed next to the physical evidence, the similarity was hard to dismiss. Further testing confirmed it. The belt belonged to Cheyenne Antoine. What had once been seen as a tragic night shaped by alcohol began to look very different. The last photo of Britney alive wasn't just a keepsake, it was proof. A timestamp, a clear record placing the suspected weapon on the person who would later say she couldn't remember what happened. From that point on, the investigation changed direction. Cheyenne was no longer viewed only as a grieving friend whose story didn't quite add up. She was a suspect. As police prepared to move forward, a single set of questions sat at the center of the case. If Cheyenne had been there, if the belt was hers, and if Britney never actually left her side that night, then what happened in the time between that smiling photo and the stretch of road where Britney Gargle was found? The truth wasn't hidden somewhere far away. It had been there the whole time, captured in a single image. By March of 2017, nearly 2 years after Britney's death, investigators believed they finally had enough to act. What once felt like a stalled case had quietly come together. The timeline was tighter, the inconsistencies were clear, and the belt, connected through both physical evidence and a time-stamped photo, had become the foundation of the case. On March 7, 2017, Cheyenne Rose Antoine was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. For Britney's family, the arrest brought mixed emotions. There was relief that the case hadn't been forgotten, and there was pain in knowing that the person accused of killing Britney was someone she trusted. Someone who had stood next to her, smiling, just hours before her life ended. As the case moved toward court, prosecutors began laying out what they believed had happened during Britney's final moments. Court records and police statements show that both young women had been drinking heavily that night. After they left Britney's grandmother's home, an argument broke out. What started it was never fully clear, but witnesses later testified that Cheyenne admitted to hitting Britney and putting a belt around her neck. The medical evidence backed up a violent confrontation. Britney died from strangulation, a cause of death that requires sustained pressure. This wasn't a sudden shove or a moment that got out of hand in seconds. It took time. Time when the person involved could have stopped. Instead, Britney was left on the side of the road. As the case moved toward trial, Cheyenne's defense focused on intoxication and memory loss. Her lawyers argued that she had been so impaired by alcohol that she couldn't remember what happened that night, and therefore couldn't form the intent needed for a murder conviction. In January 2018, before a trial ever began, Cheyenne Antoine entered a guilty plea, not to second-degree murder, but to manslaughter. By pleading guilty, she accepted responsibility for Britney's death, without admitting intent. Inside the courtroom, that distinction mattered. For Britney's family, it meant there would be no full trial, no detailed public breakdown of Britney's final moments, and no chance to hear every question answered under oath. Cheyenne was sentenced to 7 years in prison, with credit for time already served. Under Canadian law, she would be eligible for parole long before serving the full sentence. The response was immediate. Members of Britney's family stood in court and spoke about more than the violence that ended her life. They talked about the future that was taken from her, the plans she had, the independence she was working toward, the adulthood she never reached. Outside the courtroom, Britney's grandmother, Vicki Wickenhauser, spoke openly about the sentence. She called it devastatingly short for a life taken in such a violent way, and said the pain wouldn't end when the prison term did. For the public, the case opened up difficult conversations about alcohol and responsibility, about how the justice system weighs intent against outcome, and about how much digital evidence now shapes modern investigations. One photo, taken casually, without much thought, ended up unraveling the story Cheyenne tried to tell. Not because it showed violence, but because it showed closeness, opportunity, and a version of the truth that couldn't be explained away. In the end, Britney Gargle never got the chance to tell her own story. But through evidence, testimony, and the steady work of investigators, what happened that night was brought into the open. Even so, some questions never went away. Could this have been prevented? Did the sentence match the harm that was done? And what does justice really mean for a young woman whose life ended before it had the chance to fully begin? In Britney's case, one photograph quietly bridged the gap between uncertainty and fact, between what was claimed and what could actually be shown. Still, no amount of evidence can give back what was lost. There are questions that remain unanswered, not because no one asked them, but because they can't be fully known. What was said between Britney and Cheyenne in those final moments? Whether there was a moment when things could have gone differently? Whether someone could have walked away? Those answers left with Britney. Thank you for watching Murder Ledger. We explore real cases, unanswered questions, and the details that refuse to fade. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments.